This is the St. John's Bridge. It spans the Willamette River just north of Portland, Oregon. I'm calling it a hidden gem because it is a beauty that is not nearly as well known as it deserves to be. The designer of the bridge, David Steinman, took great effort regarding the appearance of the bridge. Writing in Engineering News Record in 1930, he said, quote, "In the St. John's Bridge, the desire to secure a beautiful public structure was a governing consideration." End quote. In other videos, we talked about the history and construction of the bridge. In this video, we will concentrate on Steinman's influence on the bridge's design. First, we will compare it to other contemporary bridges designed by Steinman, showing that this is almost one of a kind. Second, we will use Steinman's written comments to show the bridge as he described it. For perspective, let's start by looking at how the St. John's design fits into the history of suspension bridges. While the cables are the defining feature of a suspension bridge, the towers are what give it its personality. In the 1800s, suspension bridge towers were large, monumental masonry structures, like the Brooklyn Bridge. As the 20th century began, designers started to use steel for the towers because they cost less to build. The Williamsburg Bridge in New York was first in 1903, but it was the Manhattan Bridge in 1909 that was to become the prototype for future towers. The structure was a hollow cellular design which provided strength and some flexibility. The main external features are the rectangular shape, with the legs carrying the vertical loads, and the cross bracing for lateral stability. Note the elaborate decorations on the tower. The next big advance was the Delaware River Bridge at Philadelphia, now called the Ben Franklin Bridge. It was finished in 1926. There are two vertical legs, but the same rectangular shape and regular cross bracing. Note that there is less decoration. Here is the Detroit Bridge, now known as the Ambassador Bridge, finished in 1929. This is a common configuration for many 20th century suspension bridges. Comparing these three side by side shows how tower design was evolving. While they all share the basic rectangular shape with cross bracing, the trend is toward the towers becoming slender and less decorated. The look becomes utilitarian. With each step, the steel structure more clearly displays its function. There is a certain beauty to the simplicity of this execution in form and function. With that as background, we have arrived at the time that the St. John's was being designed. Here are other bridges David Steinman was involved in designing in the time leading up to the St. John's. The Florianopolis in Brazil, 1926, the Grand Mare in Quebec, 1928, the Mount Hope in Rhode Island, 1929, and the Waldo Hancock in Maine, 1931. Here are the tower designs for comparison. In the first two, the tower legs are angled. There is regular cross bracing and little ornamentation. When Steinman wrote about these bridges, it was about efficient structure and cost savings, which are important things. Not until the Mount Hope did he comment on artistic value. Writing later, he makes note of the, quote, lofty arched portals above the roadway. The lines of these portals harmonize with the lines of the cable, end quote. The Mount Hope won a design award from the American Institute of Steel Construction. First place in Class A bridge design, 1929. Contemporary to the St. John's was the Waldo Hancock in Maine, which has a different look. Steinman wrote for Engineering News Record, quote, "The main towers of a new artistic type, emphasizing horizontal and vertical lines, are upright Verandil trusses." End quote. It also won an ASIC prize, first place Class B, 1931. So here is a lineup of all the tower designs. Clearly, Steinman was experimenting with different design ideas. The first two appear as simple structures with angled legs and regular cross bracing. In the second two, we see artistic effects becoming more important. The Mount Hope with a pointed arch and the Waldo Hancock with the dominant rectangular lines. But among Steinman's bridges, the St. John's is unique, adding multiple details for artistic effect, with extra angled legs, emphasis on pointed arches, and the finishing touch of decorative spires. In a minute, we will take a more detailed look in Steinman's own words. First, I want to make note of another bridge that is rarely mentioned, but it's worth including in this discussion. It was contemporary to the St. John's, but not done by Steinman. When I first came across this, I had to look twice because of the similarity. This is the Mid-Hudson Bridge at Poughkeepsie, New York. It was completed in 1930, designed by another giant of the engineering world, Ralph Majeski. Note how similar the tower design is to the St. John's. Vertical legs plus external angled legs, the main portal with the pointed arch. It is just missing spires. Now let's take advantage of Steinman's writings to show you the St. John's Bridge as he described it. We started by quoting his 1930 article in ENR. Later, in that same article, he talked about the idea for the tower design. Quote, "The effectiveness of the pointed arches in the towers of the Mount Hope Bridge prompted the adoption of and further development of this motif in the design of the St. John's Bridge, where similar arches were utilized both above and below the roadway." End quote. Next is an extended quote from an article about beauty in modern bridge structures. Quote, "For beauty of composition in steel bridge design, the suspension type, well illustrated in the St. John's Bridge at Portland, Oregon, is ideal. The graceful curve of the cables is the most beautiful of all bridge outlines, and the vertical hangers are the most satisfying form of filling members. The lightly arched roadway line is clear and continuous from shore to shore, and tall, graceful towers divide the crossing into 3 spans of artistic proportion. The tower portal of the St. John's Bridge is an example of true architecture in structural steel. Here practically nothing has been added for ornament or decoration. There is no camouflage, no concealment. Everything visible is structural steel. Not a single pound of metal was wasted, and all was designed for maximum efficiency. Nevertheless, the entire construction was planned to produce beauty of line and form and to express the spirit of structural steel, its strength, its power, and its grace." David Steinman, Civil Engineering, July 1938. A third quote adds a finishing note. Quote, "It is sincerely hoped by the designers that the St. John's Bridge, by virtue of the substitution of buttressed columns and arched outlines for the conventional utilitarian X-bracing, of the gracefulness and rhythm of its approach spans, supported on an arcade of concrete piers of ascending height, and of the harmonious development of the architectural features in an attempt to present a pleasing and impressive view of the structure from all possible angles, will establish a new mark in artistic bridge design." David Steinman, ENR, February 1930. So, I am calling this beauty a hidden gem. There are 2 other videos about the St. John's Bridge. One is about construction of the bridge. In the other, we will make a visit to the bridge.